Get my 6. What's up, everybody? Can you believe it's like 5 days away? Halloween. October's almost over. I can't believe it. Say it isn't so. I've been having so much fun every evening with these October nights. 2 stories, 31 more tales for the Halloween season. I hope you have as well. I'm actually on my back porch right now. I just woke up from a nap. I am, as our friends in England would say. Shout out to Charlie in England, who submitted a great story for True Hauntings Volume 2. I am cream crackered because I hauled and split 4 truckloads of firewood this morning. Had a nap, just woke up, having my coffee. Speaking of submissions, we have a winner chicken dinner. So many submissions have been coming in, and I'm going to announce today's winner. And today's winner gets what is coming out to be quite popular. I made all this. This is a set. It's like a haunted graveyard set. You get a haunted house. This is all made out of wood, recycled lumber from pallets, tombstone, big giant candy corn, and then you get these 4 guys. It's a 7-piece set. I'll make sure I get it all right here. And I'm going to tell you who got it and why. Wait a minute. There they are. Teresa Stoney Smith is our winner for today. Teresa submitted a story that I personally edited. Erie's doing some. I can't get them all. Here we go. Erie's doing some of the editing. I was editing Teresa Stoney Smith's story. You're going to read all about it, or maybe I'll read it to you in November once we're finished with the October nights. But I'm going to mail this out, priority mail tomorrow to you, Teresa, in Missouri, state of Missouri. Her story takes place in a very creepy old sharecropper style house. It reminded me of my house. And I was editing it, and while I was editing it, anytime I got to the point in the story where a ghost appeared, the ghost of somebody who had previously inhabited the house, floorboards would start creaking upstairs. And I know the sound, like when certain places, when these old houses, you get to know them well. When it creaks in a certain place, that's because somebody's there. That's all there is to it. This happened twice while I was reading and editing Teresa's story, and there was no one there. And I even went to check. And so as soon as I was finished editing, I stopped for the day. I went outside and played. That's how creepy that story was, and that's why she's the winner. Keep submitting your stories. We're getting a lot. There's going to be a drawing every night for the rest of all the way through November 1, Day of the Dead. But what is also ironic about this is that today's story is set in St. Louis, Missouri. It's a story October 26th. The day the music died. Story very much based on extremely true events. So true that I put an author's postscript at the end to tell you the only thing you have to switch around to make the story fiction. So with no further ado, I'm going to get to it, okay? The day the music died. And I'm giving you a view of our beautiful Virginia burning bushes back here. These red bushes, I bought them from an online nursery out of Tennessee 6 years ago. They were shipped bare root. They looked like sticks about 1 foot long. If I were to go down there and stand by these, they're as tall as me. I'm almost 6 feet tall. These bushes are now 6 feet tall, very robust. And in the fall of the year, they take on this blood red hue, and it's absolutely gorgeous. I sit here and face that way when I drink coffee often after my naps and just stare at them. So I'm letting you stare at them while I do the reading. The day the music died. The month was October, the year 1999. I was off to St. Louis, Missouri for a business trip, the end of which I would be given 90 days to turn things around or lose my job. You see, I was a stockbroker at the time for a large financial concern headquartered in St. Louis. I'd been so proud to get the job the year before. The work was a far cry from my family's heritage of coal mining and lumbering. I'd been the first in my family to graduate college, and then the first to get a job where you actually got to wear a suit and tie and wing-tip shoes to work, rather than a hard hat, earplugs, and work gloves. And I should have put in here steel-toed boots. After my first year on the job, however, I was about to lose it. You see, having done all I'd done by that point in my valiant efforts to join the professional middle class, I hadn't realized that once you got the position on the team, so to say, the actual real work was only just beginning. I guess, looking back on it now, I expected people to reward me for just having gotten to where I'd gotten. People should have just thrown money at me and allowed me to invest it for them. I couldn't understand why they weren't doing so. I mean, I'd gotten the degree, I'd gotten the yuppie class job. Shouldn't the world just roll the red carpet out before my office door and direct the people to come to me, checkbooks and pens in hand? I found out in that first year that that was not how the real world works. That degree on the wall, be it my degree or anyone else's degree, and regardless of whether it came from a state college like mine had, or an Ivy League university, like the degrees of many others, is absolutely worthless without the drive, ambition, and work ethic to go along with it. I've since had this confirmed again and again by witnessing the number of educated fools in the world who are earning nothing simply because they're sitting around like I was at the time in that first year of my fancy new job, waiting on business to come to them. I was flying out to St. Louis to take a week-long course called Acceleration. Basically, it was a class taught by some of our firm's top producers, and the main focus of the class was time management and thinking big. I would learn that we all have the same amount of time in our day, 24 hours, and that the difference between top producers who were teaching the class and guys making more than $1 million, or the guys making more than $1 million a year, and those of us who were taking the class, stockbrokers who were embarrassingly making about the same amount of money as public school teachers, all boiled down to the different ways in which we chose to spend our time, and this based on whether we thought big or we thought small. At first, I had the same mentality as many of my classmates. I believed that the people in life who made big bucks only did so because they'd gotten lucky, or because they knew the right people, or because they came from affluent families, etc. I would soon learn and wholeheartedly come to believe that I was wrong. I had been walking around with a loser's mentality, all because I'd been thinking small. The fact of the matter is, and I believe this as much today as I did back in 1999 when I first heard it in that classroom, that the difference between successful people and non-successful people is that successful people are willing to do the things that non-successful people are not. And they're willing to do them over and over, for, as I also learned, we become that which we repeatedly do. If I wake up an hour early each day to make sure we get if we wake up an hour early each day to make sure we get our exercise in, we become fit. If we make excuses and say the day ahead of us is too busy and we need to save our energy for other things, we become fat. If we learn that with each rejection, remember we were in sales, we are one no closer to our next yes, and we keep pushing and make that next contact, we eventually find enough yeses to keep us in business. If we view each no as another, well, this is never going to work, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, and in time, a very short time I'll point out, we go out of business. I also learned that I had not been smart and thrifty, as I thought I'd been, taking precious time to fix every little thing that I could around the house or on my vehicle when it broke, but rather I'd been wasting my time and therefore missing out on lost revenues doing these things. For example, I prided myself on changing the oil myself when it was due to be changed in my Chevy Blazer, which I drove at the time. Why, I saved $10 by buying the oil and filter and doing it myself versus taking it to the Valvoline oil change shop. When this came up in class, one of the top producers said to me, "Oh, so your time is only worth $10 an hour?" I asked him what he meant by this, and he basically told me that if I was wasting my time changing my oil to save $10, then I clearly only viewed my time as being worth $10 an hour. Because, as he pointed out to me, if I added up my time spent buying the oil and filter and then doing the actual work, it would probably add up to about an hour. I'd never thought of it that way, but hearing him put it that way, I saw that he was right. He suggested that when I got back home to Virginia that I go to my office on a Saturday morning and print off a list of my 10 wealthiest clients and then take this list along with my cell phone to the local Valvoline shop, and while I was waiting on my oil to be changed, walk out into the parking lot and call those clients and pitch them a tax-free municipal bond. He even wrote the pitch out for me, and it went like this. Good morning, Mr. and Mrs. Old Person. I know it seems strange getting a call from me on a Saturday since the market's closed and all, but the reason I'm calling you on a Saturday is because our firm has just made available a tax-free municipal bond paying X% interest, and I'm afraid that if I waited to call you on Monday, that it would already be sold out of inventory. If you feel this investment is right for you and your loved ones, I'd recommend you buy $20,000 today, or do you feel $50,000 would be more appropriate? I thought this idea was nuts. And those dollar amounts? I mean, when I called my clients, they'd always ask me what the minimum investment amount was, and I'd always tell them $5,000 because that was the truth. And since they liked me, they'd buy $5,000, and I would walk around the rest of the day like I'd done something. But when I tried what this $1 million producer had suggested, my mind was absolutely blown. I would get responses to the tune of, oh no, 20K's enough. I don't have 50K just laying around. Put me in for 20K and I'll bring you a check on Monday. That class changed my entire way of thinking, and as a result, it changed my world. I made more money that Saturday morning while waiting on someone else to change the oil in my Blazer than I had paid for the Blazer itself my last year of college in the first place, and that is not an exaggeration. Boy, had the old me been a fool. I would go on to blow well past the numbers I had to hit within the next 90 days after leaving that class, and I would keep that job until I left 5 years later on my terms to go into private practice. I would eventually realize that the line of work wasn't for me at all, and well, now here I am writing these books, loving every minute of it, and as such, never feeling as if I ever work a day in my life. But it was something that happened one night toward the end of that week that would forever change me as well. It would make me question whether or not I'd done the right thing, and to this day, more than 20 years later, I still wonder if a certain individual who'd been sitting only 4 seats ahead of me on the local tram lived through that true October night of terror. The only way you'll understand what I'm talking about is if I tell you the full story, and this I will do now below. It was the afternoon before our last day of classes, and we were having a late lunch. I'd befriended another broker about my age from somewhere in southern Georgia. Our classmates called us Bumpkin 1, that was me, and Bumpkin 2, that was him. But his real name was Jimmy. "Did you hear that Steve Bishop is going to be here in concert tonight?" Jimmy asked while we ate. "Wasn't he the lead singer of that band Roadkill from the mid-'80s, I said. "Yeah, man," Jimmy said. "I used to love those guys back in the day, even if they were only one-hit wonders." Roadkill had been an awesome band for about 3 months back in the mid-'80s, but like most 80s hair metal bands, they never achieved their full potential, and mostly for the same reason as most of the other bands. Either half the band was always in rehab, or the other half needed to go to rehab but wouldn't. But for those 3 months in the middle of whatever season of whichever year it had been back in the 80s, when all the radio stations played their one-hit song every 15 minutes, man, those guys rocked. "I was thinking about going to see the show since we're in town anyway," Jimmy said. "I mean, we'll probably never be able to see him again. Half the other guys from the band have already OD'd. It's why he's solo. Who knows when his number will be up." "Why not?" I said. "Even if we're up late, we can fake our way through class tomorrow. We'll do the buddy system, help keep each other awake." "You guys really are bumpkins, aren't you?" another broker from our class said. "What do you mean?" I asked. "You mean you didn't like Roadkill?" "It's not that, you dumb hillbilly," he said. I'd already been living in the People's Republic of Charlottesville, Virginia for a couple of years by that time, where plenty of pretentious snobs had referred to me by that moniker, dumb hillbilly, once they'd found out I was from the other side of the state line, so it didn't bother me. "Don't you know that St. Louis is the crime and murder capital of the U.S., this yuppie classmate of ours continued, and you dumb bumpkins are talking about going into the heart of the city to see some has-been sing a bunch of songs, only one of which you even know, at night?" I'd never thought too much about what he was saying, but he had a point. Everyone in our firm warned us before we went to St. Louis, and the people with our firm who were stationed in St. Louis warned us once we got there. Do not go out at night. St. Louis is not a safe place. Jimmy and I had figured that yuppie who'd called me a dumb hillbilly and both of us bumpkins was just like most yuppies, afraid of his own shadow. The kind of guy who focused on all the little things that could go wrong rather than all the things that could go right. As a matter of fact, one of the top producers who was teaching our acceleration class had actually told him that in those exact words. Well, not the yuppie part, because that guy, the top producer, was a yuppie too, just not the scared shitless type. He told the guy to focus on the positive outcomes, not the negative. He told him that the biggest thing holding him back, just like the thing that had been holding me back, had been my practice of stepping over dollars to pick up pennies. I can look back now as a post-middle-aged man with worldly experiences and see that young yuppie and myself were merely products of our cultural environments, opposite as they were, and we both needed to reject the parts of our cultural environments that were keeping us from succeeding. We chose not to heed this yuppie's warning, and after class at the end of the day, Jimmy and I went back to our rooms, took a brief nap, woke, showered, and then met in the hotel's restaurant for dinner and left from there for downtown St. Louis to watch one of the best one-hit wonder hair metal bands from our youth, Roadkill. Well, at least their lead singer. We had no problem getting downtown and to the arena where the concert was being held. We'd asked one of the clerks at the hotel's front desk the best way to get there, and she'd told us we could take a cab to the tram station and ride the tram from there. She said that was not the quickest route, but it was the cheapest route, and she warned us that it was also the most dangerous. She suggested we take a cab the whole way, but she pointed out it would be 3 times as expensive. Remember, dear reader, or in this case, dear listener, this was long before the days of Uber and smartphones and all that jazz. Jimmy and I were so excited for the show, we were willing to throw caution to the wind. Not to mention that if either of us had money coming out of our ears, we wouldn't have been in town for the acceleration class in the first place. Hence, we took a cab to the tram station and took the tram into the heart of St. Louis from there. We had no problems whatsoever, at least, on the way into the city. When we got to the arena, we were heartbroken to find that the show was entirely sold out. Shit, we both said numerous times. Shit, 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 shit. We couldn't find a scalper outside anywhere that had any tickets left. Obviously, there were a hell of a lot of people who'd loved that one song back in 1980. I think it was, whatever the year had been. What now? Jimmy asked after we realized we were not going to get tickets and finally gave up. I guess we go back, I said. Should we take a cab? Jimmy asked. I mean, it is later. Maybe it'll be more dangerous on the way back. Can we afford it? I asked. We both opened our wallets and counted our money. I was married to my first wife at the time, and she was one of those strong, independent woman types. No, she didn't go out and work and bring home the bacon, so to say, but she controlled the family finances, as in I made the money and she spent it. I used to beg her to work because we had 3 kids and we were always coming up short on the bills, but she refused. She told me that she didn't want to humiliate me like that, because if she were to work, then everyone would know that I was not a real man. I couldn't afford to support my family, and she just thought too much of me to do that to me. Hell, I always just figured that most folks wouldn't give a shit, and if they did notice that she'd gone out and gotten a job, they'd just think we were the typical family in our late 20s who'd had kids before we'd been financially stable enough to do so, and that like most young families, we needed 2 incomes to make ends meet. But hell, what did I know? She was one of those yuppie types, and well, as those types of folks like to point out to me regularly, I was just a dumb hillbilly. I reckon this is a long way of saying that she kept my debit card, like my testicles, in her purse, so I didn't have enough cash on me at any given time to meet my needs. I had no way to get my hands on any more. FYI, and on a side note, after our divorce, I would actually have to enlist in the United States Army as an infantryman and go through basic training down at Fort Benning, Georgia to grow a set of balls back after having been completely eviscerated by that strong, independent woman during the 6 years I was married to her. But I digress. Tell you, there's a lot of men around Charlottesville who need to join the infantry to get their balls back after you see the way I would like to say the way they interact with their wives, but I would say the way their wives dictate their lives. That's a hell of a sidebar right there. But alas, I used to be one of them. The point I should have gotten to a lot quicker is this. We did not have enough money for a cab, so we had to take the tram. Things went smoothly until the tram made its next to last stop, and one just before Jimmy and I would be getting off. At this stop, 3 young black men in their late 20s, about our age at the time, boarded the tram. Now, I'm sure that my wonderful neighbors back in the People's Republic of Charlottesville would have accused me of racially profiling. Nay, since I was a rural white man from West by God, Virginia, I'm sure they would have accused me of being downright racist for the feeling I got in my gut the minute I saw these three young men. I will point out here and now and for the record evermore that their skin color had nothing to do with the feeling I got. The fact that their pants were sagging down well below their asses had nothing to do with the feeling I got. And the fact that they were wearing hoodies with the hoodie parts on their heads, despite it having been a particularly humid October night, as most nights during most months except the winter months tend to be in St. Louis, had nothing to do with the feeling I had in my gut. My gut was telling me there was about to be trouble because of the look I saw in these men's eyes. It was a look I would not see again until years later when I was in the deserts of Iraq. And let me tell you, after what I witnessed on that tram that October night all those years ago in St. Louis, I did not hesitate to act on my gut feelings when I saw that same look in Iraq. And had I not, I honestly do not believe I'd be sitting here writing this story, or reading it in this case, about that October night in St. Louis today. The three men walked slowly down the aisle of the tram, heading toward Jimmy and me. We were sitting in the very back seats of the car. As they went, they gave cold, calculated stares to everyone else sitting on the tram. Jimmy leaned over, hardly noticeable, and whispered in my ear, "Keep your head down. Do not make eye contact." And he didn't have to tell me twice. I would roll my eyes upward every few seconds, becoming more and more nervous each time I did, as I saw that the three men were getting closer and closer to us. They continued to give everyone else their cold, calculated stares, but as if the other passengers on the tram had heard what Jimmy had whispered to me as well, they all kept their heads down and made sure not to make eye contact with any of these three men. Until some dumbass, a Caucasian male about 30 years old, sitting by himself, looked up at the three men and said hello. Two of the three men lit into that man who'd had the audacity to speak to them like he'd raped their little sisters. I mean, I've never until this day seen anyone take the pummeling that poor bastard took that night. The third of the three men stood there challenging everyone else on the tram to intervene. "We've got to do something," I told Jimmy, merely a whisper. "I mean, we can't just sit here." "Dude," Jimmy said, "that guy will kill us. Look at his waist." He was speaking of the mouthy bastard challenging all would-be comers. I looked at his waist and I could clearly see the handle of a handgun sticking out of the waistband of his pants. "What do we do?" I asked Jimmy. "We can't just sit here." "The fuck we can't," Jimmy said. "We sit here and we keep our heads down. Now shut the fuck up before they hear us." Too late. The mouthpiece of the group and the guy with the gun, that is, if the others didn't have guns as well and we just hadn't noticed, had heard Jimmy. "What'd you say, you honky-ass cracker motherfucker?" the guy said. He put his hand on his piece and began coming our way. Now I was the one telling Jimmy to keep his head down and not to make eye contact. "You feeling froggy, motherfucker?" the mouthpiece said, and he'd now cut the original distance between us in half. "Jump, motherfucker, jump!" And then the tram stopped. We'd reached our station. As the doors opened, the three young men of ill repute ran out of the doors so fast it was as if they'd never been there. The second they were gone, everyone else ran out the doors equally fast. Jimmy and I walked past the poor bastard who'd been dumb enough to say hello to these guys, and when I looked down, I could see that he'd been beaten unconscious. At least that's what I'd hoped. I'd hoped he was only unconscious and not dead. After we exited the tram, the door simply closed and the tram went on its way. If there was a conductor on the tram somewhere, he or she didn't give a shit about the poor bastard lying in a pool of their own blood and tears in the back. "I think that poor bastard is dead," I said to Jimmy. "I do too," he said. We both looked at each other and at the exact same time said, "We can never let anyone know about this." There was no need for us to call 911. 4 or 5 of the other passengers who'd been in the tram car were already calling. Knowing these people had this part of the situation taken care of, Jimmy and I were set on making sure no one ever found out how cowardly we'd been. We wanted to get out of there before anyone we might have known from class saw us. Jimmy and I jumped into the back of a cab that was waiting at the station. We rode to the hotel in silence. When we got to the hotel, we both got out and went to our separate rooms, not having spoken a word since agreeing that we could never let anyone find out about what had happened. It would have been far too embarrassing, Sure, I can look back on it, as I do often, and tell myself that doing the right thing and doing the smart thing is not always the same thing. Had we intervened, we no doubt could have ended up dead. But still, something like that sits with you. We both felt that if others would have found out about it, it would have only made things worse. The next morning, Jimmy and I happened to arrive at class at the same time. We were the last ones getting there, and when we walked in, everyone in the class was staring at us. They had these blank looks on their faces. Their eyes were wide and their mouths were a bit agape, and they just stared at us as if we were either legends or cursed. They know, I whispered to Jimmy, but obviously not so quietly, as one of our fellow students said, "Of course we know. Everyone knows." "Oh, shit," Jimmy said, looking at me and making eye contact with me for the first time since we'd agreed not to tell anyone. "I mean," another student in our class said, "you guys watched that guy die." "You actually stood there and watched him bleed out," another student said. How in the hell did these people know this, I wondered. This was back during the days before social media. There was no Google. If you wanted to find something on the internet, you had to use Alta Vista or web crawler. And people didn't upload every little anything to the internet back then like they do today. So it was still next to impossible to find news on any events that were not national or world newsworthy. "How do you guys know about it?" I said. If I sounded stunned, it's because I was. "It's been all over the news since last night," the yuppie who'd warned us about going into St. Louis at night had said. "I can't believe you guys actually went out." "Ah, shit," Jimmy said, collapsing into an empty chair. I sank down into the chair beside him, ready to take the tongue shellacking I deserved. Jimmy and I had been cowards. We'd sat by idly and watched common criminals beat one of our fellow human beings to death, and we had done nothing. "Look," the instructor said, "they're airing it again." Though Jimmy and I had been the last ones to class, we'd not been late, and the instructor had been playing some news channel on the television so everyone could see what the stock market was doing that day, at least the futures, as the market hadn't yet opened. And in other news, the anchor on the screen, a beautiful woman who may have been 25 or who may have been 45, depending upon whether she'd been through the Botox phase of her career or not yet, said, "Again, we are sorry to have to report that Steve Allen Bishop, former lead singer of the 80s hair metal band Roadkill, was killed last night on stage." "That's right, Gloria," her co-anchor, a man who could have been, well, the same thing about Botox and all that, etc., said. "It appears as if Bishop was trying to make a grand entrance for his sold-out show in downtown St. Louis last night. However, things did not go according to plan." "That's right, Derek," Gloria said, now taking over the commentary. "Bishop was being lowered to the stage by a cable for the opening of the show when the cable snapped and Bishop fell more than 40 feet to the stage below." "That's right, Gloria," Derek said, taking the lead back again. "Paramedics on the scene were afraid to move Bishop without the proper equipment due to an apparent neck injury, and he ended up bleeding to death from other injuries he sustained from the fall before other paramedics could arrive with the proper equipment." "Bishop was only 34 years old," Gloria said. "And you guys were there," someone in the class said. This brought Jimmy and me, who both had been shocked by the news, to say, at the least, back to reality. "Yeah," I said. We were there. And it wasn't a lie. I guess we'd been outside the arena when this tragic event happened. No need to fill the class in on the rest of the details. One of my mantras today as a writer is never ruin a good story with facts. In this case, however, the facts wouldn't have ruined the story. They would have highlighted our cowardice. That's why we left them omitted. "If you guys want to take the day off," the instructor said, "you can. We're just going to talk about everything we learned this week." Jimmy and I both said okay, and we got up and left class. I went to my room and packed all my things and left for the airport. My flight wasn't for another 6 hours, but I didn't care. All I wanted to do was sit in a bar at the airport and get drunk. When I arrived at the airport, I crept into the first bar I saw, and who should be sitting there at the bar other than Jimmy, pounding shot after shot. He didn't see me, so I crept right back out and went to a different bar. I did get drunk, but I made my plane and I got home. I slept off my drunk on the flight, but my wife could smell the booze on my breath when she picked me up at the airport. "Must have been a hell of a time," is all she said. "It was all I said, and I never told her about what I'd witnessed on that tram. Like I pointed out earlier, that trip to St. Louis changed me. The class I took allowed me to see how I'd been using my time quite unwisely, and it had taught me how to make changes so that I would use my time much more wisely, which, like I've also said, would lead to much higher revenues. And though I left that business nearly 20 years ago, as of this writing, or as of this reading, I still implement the things I learned in that acceleration class into my current endeavors. I can't say that I don't look back on that night and wonder what happened to that poor guy who'd been beaten so badly by those criminals, because I do. Part of me wonders if I didn't just join the military to grow my balls back after having been eviscerated by my first wife, and because we'd been attacked on 9/11. Part of me believes wholeheartedly that I wanted to become the type of person that would be willing to step in and defend those who lack the ability to defend themselves. In other words, I wanted to become an American soldier, largely because I'd not had whatever that special something was that was needed that night on the tram in St. Louis to do it then, that being protect someone who needed protection. I'll never know what became of that guy. I'll never know how many other innocent people, those 3 criminals and so many like them in the city of St. Louis back in 1999, preyed upon. Maybe some things are best left unknown. The end. Postscript. If you were to take the story above, The Day the Music Died, or that I just read, and replace the dates, exchanging October of 1999 for May of 1999, and if you were to take the fictitious rock star Steve Bishop from the fictitious rock band Roadkill and exchange him for the Canadian-American WWE, formerly WWF, superstar wrestler Owen Hart, every single bit of the rest of the story you just read, or in this case just listened to, would be 100% true. Rest in peace, Owen Hart. Rest in peace, nameless stranger from the tram. Yeah. Me and a guy from class went down to watch the WWE events that night that Owen Hart died when he fell off the cable. Couldn't get in. It was sold out. Didn't find out about it till the next morning in class, just like that. And that terrible event that we saw on the tram actually did happen. That was, I'll tell you, I hope St. Louis has changed. My family and I were there this summer on our cross-country journey, but it was during the day. There's no way in hell I would get caught dead in that city after dark again ever. But I do hope things have changed. So Teresa Stoney Smith, this is coming to you. Thank you for your submission for True Hauntings Volume number 2. Guys, girls, keep submitting your stories. If you have any experience or any family member had an experience or close friend of anything related to the paranormal, submit it to the channel. The email address is crazylake@mail.com, crazylake@mail.com. And you will be considered for our daily drawing to win some of the really neat handmade Halloween decorations that I've created in my woodshed here. So I hope you enjoyed this story. We've only got a handful left. See you tomorrow night for the next one.